Good evening, and welcome to another scintillating episode of Diatribes from the Voice of Doom. Now, here's your sepulchre of sentience, Voice of Doom. Hi. Middle of the night, drank a bit. Actually, 1:11. I'm always seeing 1:11 on the clock. It's weird. I don't know what that time is, but I had a brilliant idea of doing a educational diatribe and something that will enlighten and edify everybody. Well, at least a bunch of people. Because I could talk about the coming conflagration that I guess there's some sort of a timetable that Petri Dish is set because he's bound and determined to get us all killed. Vis-a-vis, somehow we're having loggerheads with this Ukraine thing. And I could talk about loggerheads on the Canadian-U.S. border where people kind of are a day late and a dollar short, in my opinion. I mean, it's all right. I think they should do what they're doing for other reasons than what they're doing it for. But I could talk about that subject, and I will, because it'll either get way, way, way worse or things will calm down. So we'll see what happens. But I wanted to talk about Black History Month because I decided that I would try to come at it from a different angle. CRT angle is negative. It doesn't lift up the human spirit. And I'm going to tell you what does. Right now, because I did some research and I realized that learning is beautiful. I really, as long as I take the time to make my eyeballs go across the sentences, you learn a lot, man, and it's interesting. Life is interesting. All right, the Emancipation Proclamation was given by Abraham No Initial Lincoln, September 22nd, 1862. And it just said, you are all free. Anyone in bondage, anyone oppressed will not be repressed and will be free. And that was probably a big thing for a lot of people. And they were in the middle of the Civil War, so a bunch of states weren't going to follow that edict right away, but they did eventually. Now, the key word here is 1862, okay? September. 1870, in the 41st Congress, there were 3 African-American congressmen. And I'm kind of getting this from Glenn Beck, so I learned it kind of back then. But I never saw history because they didn't teach us this in Hawaii. They weren't interested. Jefferson Franklin Long, Joseph Hayne Rainey, and Hiram Rhodes Revels. And Rainey, I think, was in for a long time. Hiram Rhodes Revels was the first senator in history. First black senator, excuse me. He filled a vacancy in Mississippi after the southern states rejoined the Union. And they wanted a black guy as their senator, and that's who the Congress of that state, they chose the senator from their whatever little assembly they had. It wasn't like now. Chose a black guy, and he was a Republican, and they were all Republicans. 42nd Congress, Robert Carlos DeLarge, Robert Brown Elliott, Joseph Hayne Rainey, again, Benjamin Sterling Turner, and Josiah Thomas Long, 5 congressmen in the 42nd Congress, which was around 1872. So think about that for a minute. 10 years, less than 10 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, there's black congressmen in Congress, and they're bellowing for things, and they're being heard, and they're articulate, they're orators, they're preachers. Tell you more. Hiram Rhodes Revels, the first African American senator, filled a vacancy in 1870. He was an orator and a preacher. He was born of free people. So he was born in the North. Now, I read a bunch about him, and I don't remember it, but you should look it up. Look up Hiram Rhodes Revels. And he did odd jobs, and he did this and that, and he fought for the North, and he did what he had to, and he got interested in politics. And then he ended up being, working his way up through the bureaucracy until they said, let's make this guy senator. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts, probably a white guy, said, and this is a great line, all men are created equal, says the Great Declaration, and now a great act attests this verity. Today we make the Declaration a reality. The Declaration was only half established by independence. The greatest duty remained behind. In assuring the equal rights of all, we complete the work. It's one of the best lines ever in history. Nobody even knows who Senator Charles Sumner from Massachusetts is, but that's what he said when the first black senator took the oath of office. So come on. I'm sick of this, we're so oppressed. Okay, now, things got bad. In the 43rd Congress, there was 6 African American congressmen. In the 44th Congress, there was 8. So they were getting more and more representation, which is fine, and it's great. And you realize that if these white crackers who were just used to having slaves around, and now they have these guys in Congress, and who the hell's voting for them, and they must be cheating or whatever, that just wasn't the way it was, okay? America would have been fine. America would have been great if people didn't force the issue. And everybody, well, I won't say everybody knows it. It's obviously delusional people, but everybody should know that America was doing fine if you let the natural behaviors take its course. There would be racism, yes, but there wouldn't be what we have now. We are backwards, primordial apes. But I learned more, and I want to tell you. And I'm not going to get into why in the 46th Congress there was 1. It was 1879, so it didn't take long before something took effect. Maybe it was the Dred Scott, whatever, or Jim Crow laws or whatever, but I guess white people were saying we can't have so many African Americans in Congress because that just won't do. But they were all Republicans, all of them, up until, there's this other guy, Blanche Kelso Bruce, served in the Congress. He was born 1841, died 1898. His mother was a slave. His father was the owner of Mother. 11 children were in the house. And he was the personal servant to his half-brother, but treated more or less as an equal. So you see how these families back then, they had weird dynamics too. Nothing new, dysfunction. The father owns the mother, and come on. I found him interesting. I think you should look him up, Blanche Kelso Bruce. Nobody knows who that is. And he was a brilliant guy. He worked his way up through the ranks. He fought in the Civil War, what have you, and then he does odd jobs and works on the railroad or does whatever, and he gets a bureaucratic job, and they say he's smart and he sounds good, so let's put him up there for Congress. It's great. Something went wrong in 1879. And going up into that, we had the first Democrat African American was in 1935, Arthur Wergs Mitchell. And I can tell you probably why, because black people loved Franklin Delano. They loved him. And that's a stereotype and that's a generalization, but in general, FDR was good for minorities. They liked him. He was better than the other guys. So fine. They had all kinds of work programs, and everybody was looking for work, so they didn't really care what color you were. It's like we're all out of work. Depression. So the Democrats, all of a sudden, they're all Democrats. And somehow the Democrats convinced everybody that the Republicans were the bad guys. And the exact opposite is true. And they're still bad in what they're doing. Because they're teaching CRT and they're not teaching about how many senators and congressmen there were right after the Emancipation Proclamation. They should look at how they lived and say, look at these guys, man. They struggled and they worked odd jobs and they worked their way up because they got an education, okay? And learning is beautiful. I mean, I found that out because I'm looking at all this stuff and I'm going, man, there's so much information out there. So that shouldn't be a problem. It's just different people want to learn different things. And that's why you need to do my idea of getting rid of the public school system. And I was going to do more on this and talk about all the African American inventors and engineers in the 19th century after the Emancipation Proclamation. It's amazing. You don't have to talk about victimization because everybody's great. Everybody can do whatever they want. It's been proven right after 10 years. Congressmen, they were well, they weren't slaves per se, but yeah, they were former slaves along, and they're congressmen. 10 years after the Emancipation. That's what you should think about if you want to talk CRT. That's critical race theory in a nutshell. That everybody's great. And it's amazing what people can do if you let nature take its course, which we aren't doing at all right now. So I will get back to the conflagration later, but I'm going to do a part 2 on this because I'm going to get into this black inventors because I know they invented a lot, like the pencil and all this crap. So, I enjoyed this one because it's a little bit educational. And if people watch it, they might learn something. See, education doesn't have to be a big problem. That's 14 minutes. And I think you should have learned a lot if you took notes. So I bid you adieu, and I will see you at the next lecture.